Welcome to FolkFear, where ancient legends, forbidden rituals, and inherited curses are told beneath fading firelight and the weight of shadow. Here, every story is more than a tale to chill your skin. It is a question that lingers, whispering, what if it still exists out there? Tonight, I'll take you to a mist-choked mountain hamlet where the dead are never truly gone. In every home stands a wooden dresser, not for the living, but for the garments of the dead, kept whole for 12 years to hold their lingering souls. But among these sacred chests, there is one more, older than the house itself, the 13th dresser. No one remembers whose clothes it keeps. No one dares to open it. Until one night, grief and anger break the lock, and inside lie garments soaked in fresh blood, still warm to the touch. From that moment, death begins to walk from house to house, taking its payment in silence. This is the story of generational guilt, the price of breaking a sacred taboo, and a dresser that does not keep the dead. It feeds them. The village sat like a forgotten thought at the base of the northern mountain, swallowed in a constant shroud of pale, shifting mist. The air there was always damp, carrying the scent of wet earth and rotting pine. Even in summer, the cold clung to the skin like a second layer, and sound never seemed to travel far, as if the fog itself swallowed voices whole. Hal had lived here all his life. He knew every crooked path, every stone wall slick with moss, every weather-worn roof tile that clicked in the wind. And yet, there were parts of this place he could not name, corners where the mist thickened so much it felt like stepping into another time. The elders said the village was built on old ground, older than the trees, though no one ever explained what that meant. Every house, from the smallest shack to the largest ancestral home, kept a dresser. Not a modern piece of furniture, but a heavy wooden chest, darkened by age, its surface carved with patterns worn smooth by decades of touch. These were not for linens, nor for treasures. They were for the dead. When someone passed, their garments, every last stitch they owned, were carefully washed, dried, and folded into the family's dresser. Then the chest was sealed, untouched, for 12 years. The elders claimed the garments carried the scent of the soul, and disturbing them before the 12th year could call the spirit back. 12 years, one dresser for each generation, an unbroken chain of memory. It was a tradition so old that no one questioned it. The chests stood in the corners of living rooms and sleeping quarters like silent guardians, their locked lids collecting dust, their unseen contents quietly aging in the dark. Hal's own home was small, the walls lined with smoke stains from the cooking fire. Their dresser stood against the far wall, broad-shouldered and imposing, its iron lock dulled with rust. It was his mother's dresser now, for she had fallen gravely ill, and the doctor from the next town had said there was nothing more to be done. But in the dim light of dusk, as Hal sat by his mother's bed, he realized something strange. There were two dressers in their home. One stood where it always had. The other loomed beside the old wardrobe, a darker, rougher thing, its wood almost black, its carvings unfamiliar. He had never seen it before. And when he asked his mother about it, she turned her face to the wall and whispered, "Don't touch it, Hal. Don't even look at it for too long." The fog pressed harder against the window. Somewhere outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest scent of something metallic, something like blood. The day his mother died, The fog lay heavier than usual, thick enough to bead on skin and soak into clothing. It felt as though the mountain itself had sunk lower, pressing the village into the wet earth. Hao sat at her bedside until her final breath, a quiet exhale that seemed to vanish before it reached the air. The moment her chest stilled, the old women who had been waiting outside stepped in silently. Their hands were already wrapped in white cloths, their movements practiced. They covered her face with a linen shroud, murmuring the prayers passed down through centuries. Hao wanted to stay beside her, but the women ushered him out. "It is the work of the living to prepare the dead," one said. Her voice was not unkind, but it carried the weight of something final. Outside, the village gathered in the courtyard. The mist blurred their shapes into shifting shadows, and every cough or shuffle echoed unnaturally in the damp air. Hao felt eyes on him, some pitying, some calculating, as if his mother's death had shifted something in the unspoken balance of the place. The funeral rites were slow, deliberate. A bowl of rice was placed at his mother's head. Incense burned in thin, trembling lines. The shrouded body was washed and dressed in her finest clothes, garments that would soon be sealed away. Ha watched as they folded each piece with almost reverent care, laying them inside the family dresser. But then, they moved toward the other chest. Hao stiffened. "Not that one," he said, his voice harsher than he intended. The elders exchanged glances. The tallest among them, a stooped man with eyes like wet stone, shook his head. "It must be done," he said. Hao stepped forward, but two of the younger men blocked his path. He could only watch as the elders opened the blackened, unfamiliar dresser. Its iron lock was already unlatched, though no one had touched it. The wood groaned faintly as the lid lifted, and a damp, metallic scent curled into the air. Hao caught only a glimpse, cloth the color of old bruises, edges frayed and stained, before the women placed one of his mother's scarves inside. They shut the lid quickly, as though afraid of letting something slip out. He turned to the tall elder. "That's not hers, that dresser." He cut him off with a look that carried both warning and fear. "Some garments do not belong to the dead alone." Before Hao could demand an explanation, the gong sounded, calling the village to carry the body to the burial ground. The moment passed, swallowed by the ritual march into the mist. Yet even as the earth closed over her mother's grave, Hao's mind stayed fixed on the second chest, the 13th dresser. Older than the house, older than anyone could remember. And now it held a piece of her. That night, the funeral smoke still clung to Hao's clothes, the faint sweetness of burnt incense mixed with the sour damp of the fog, curling under his door and settling in the corners of the room. Sleep would not come. He sat by the low table, staring at the two dressers against the far wall, one familiar, the other a shadow of blackened wood that seemed to drink in the lamplight. The village elder came to see him, the same tall, stooped man who had overseen the burial. He removed his wide-brimmed hat, shook the mist from its edge, and lowered himself onto the mat across from Hao. "You've never asked about the dressers before?" the old man said, his voice soft, but carrying a weight that made Hao's chest tighten. "I didn't need to. Everyone knows what they are. 12 years, one dresser for each generation. Keep the clothes whole so the spirit can rest." The elder nodded slowly. "That is what you were told. That is what we tell the children." Hao frowned. "And the 13th? The old man's gaze shifted toward the dark chest. "That one does not hold the dead." The room seemed to shrink, the shadows pressing closer. Outside, a single drop of water fell from the eaves, loud in the silence. "It is older than this house, older than your mother, older than your grandfather. No one remembers whose garments it first kept, because they were never meant to be remembered. That dresser is not a shrine, it is a mouth." Hal blinked. A mouth? The elder leaned forward, his voice lowering until it was almost a whisper. "Garments are more than cloth. They hold a person's scent, their warmth, the oils from their skin, all the pieces of a life the body leaves behind. Most dressers keep these traces safe until the spirit lets go. But the 13th dresser takes them, feeds on them, and when the scent fades, it hungers for more." Hal felt his stomach knot. Then why keep it? Why not destroy it? The elder's eyes darkened. "Because there is a price for everything. Long ago, the village made a pact. The 13th dresser would be fed in exchange for the safety of the living. As long as it had the garments of the dead, it would not take the living themselves." The lamplight flickered as if a breeze had slipped through, though the windows were shut. "And if it is opened?" Hal asked. The elder's jaw tightened. "Then it will remember it can feed faster. The cloth will no longer be enough." Hal glanced again at the black chest. The lock was closed now, but he could still smell it, faint, metallic, and warm. For the first time in his life, the village's ancient tradition no longer felt like protection. It felt like a bargain made with something that was still very much alive. 3 nights after the funeral, the fog grew so thick it blurred even the lamplight into pale halos. Hal sat alone, the silence of the house pressing in on him like a second skin. The village had returned to its routines. The women swept the courtyards at dawn. The men carried bundles of wood from the slopes. But whenever Hal walked past, their conversations would falter. He could feel their eyes following him, some pitying, others wary. The air seemed to hum with something unspoken. That evening, a group of neighbors visited, bringing food. Hal thanked them, but they did not linger. As they left, he caught fragments of their whispers drifting back through the fog. "Shouldn't have put her scarf in there. The 13th's already too full. If it wakes." The words clung to him like burrs. He poured himself rice wine, one cup after another, until the edges of the room softened. From where he sat, he could see the black dresser. Its surface seemed darker tonight, as if it absorbed every flicker of firelight. His mother's scarf was in there now, the last thing she ever touched, and they had locked it away in something the elder himself called a mouth. The thought twisted in his chest. What right did they have? What right did some old pact have to take her from him twice? He found himself on his feet, the cup still in his hand. The dresser loomed larger with each step. He touched the iron lock, cold, slick with condensation. Beneath the metal, the wood pulsed faintly with warmth, as if something inside had been breathing against it. And then, a sound. Soft at first, like fabric shifting in a drawer. Then clearer, a slow, deliberate scratching. It came from deep within, dragging along the grain of the wood. Hal's breath caught. His hand hovered over the lock. "How?" His mother's voice, quiet, almost tender, curling out from the seams of the dresser. He froze. "Mother?" "It's cold here. Let me out." The fog outside pressed hard against the windows. The scratching grew louder, sharper. Hal's pulse roared in his ears. The wine burned in his veins. Without thinking, he grabbed the lock. It should have resisted, but the latch slipped open with a wet click, as though it had been waiting. The lid groaned as it rose. Inside, the darkness was thick, swallowing the lamplight. And there, folded neatly, impossibly clean, was his mother's scarf, its fabric dripping with fresh, red warmth. The smell hit him like a blow, not the scent of old cloth, but of blood, rich, metallic, alive. Something moved beneath the pile of garments. The first thing Hao noticed was the heat, not the warmth of a sunlit day, but the feverish heat of something freshly alive, breath, flesh, blood. It rolled out from the open dresser in slow waves, wrapping around him, sinking into his skin. He reached toward the scarf. His fingers sank into the fabric, and liquid welled up between them, thick, sticky, unmistakable. The crimson sheen caught the lamplight, quivering like something that had only just left a body. The smell was overpowering now. Copper, salt, and the faint musk of sweat still clinging to the fibers. He could feel the weave of the cloth as if it were a pulse, each thread tightening under his touch. Beneath the scarf lay other garments, layered deep, dresses, shirts, trousers, all of them impossibly damp, as though they had been steeped in a warm basin of blood. Some bore stains in the shape of handprints. Others were marked with jagged tears, threads curling outward like ragged flesh. As Hao lifted one piece, something slid free from its folds. A single long hair, black and wet, clinging to his wrist like it did not want to let go. He shook it off, but the hair seemed to twitch before slipping to the floor. Then came the sound. It started faint, the way fabric whispers when it rubs against itself. But the rhythm grew, turning into a slow, deliberate rasp, the unmistakable noise of nails dragging across wood. From the bottom of the dresser. Hao froze, his hands hovering above the pile. The rasping stopped. In the thick silence that followed, he thought he could hear breathing, not his own, but heavier, deeper, as though a chest was pressing against the underside of the wood. "Mother?" he whispered, though the word felt hollow. The breathing quickened. Something shifted beneath the garments, making them rise and fall in uneven swells. And then, with a sudden sharp jerk, the whole pile lurched upward, as if whatever was underneath had pushed against it from below. Hao stumbled back, his knee hitting the floor hard. The dresser groaned, its hinges flexing. One sleeve, from a shirt he did not recognize, slid over the edge, dripping a line of blood onto the floorboards. The drops fell in slow, perfect intervals. Tap, tap, tap. Each one spreading into the grain, dark as ink. And then, as if responding to some silent cue, the garments settled. The breathing faded. But Hao knew something had changed. The black wood seemed heavier now, the lid sinking lower, as though the chest had swallowed someone whole. When he reached to close it, his fingers brushed the lock. It was warm, and this time it did not click shut. By morning, the fog had not lifted. It clung to the rooftops like old, damp cloth, seeping through door frames, muffling the sound of roosters. Hao barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the garments shifting, heard the slow rasp from inside the black dresser. He had forced the lid shut sometime before dawn, though the lock refused to catch. It felt wrong to leave it open, yet wrong to touch it again. In the dim light, The dresser looked unchanged, as if the night before had been nothing more than a fever dream. Then the shouting began. It came from the far end of the village, where the path narrowed into the tree line. Voices tangled together, urgent and high-pitched. Hao stepped outside, the chill of the fog wrapping around him. By the time he reached the crowd, they were gathered in a loose circle outside an old woman's home. The air reeked of smoke and damp earth, but beneath it lingered another scent, sharp, metallic, familiar. Two men emerged from the house, carrying a bundle wrapped in a white sheet. The sheet clung to what was clearly a body, its outline small, frail, a child. Hao's stomach tightened. "They found her just after sunrise," someone murmured near him, "sleeping beside her parents. When they woke, she was like this." A pause, heavy with fear. No clothes. Hao's eyes flicked to the doorway. There, against the far wall inside, he could see the family's own dresser, the one meant for the dead, its lid still shut. This was not a ritual death. This was something else. The elder pushed through the crowd, his face drawn tight. He didn't look at Hao, but his voice carried to him all the same. "It's begun," he said, low enough for only those nearest to hear. The body was carried toward the burial ground, swallowed by the mist. The villagers stood in uneasy clusters, speaking in half-whispers, their eyes darting to the shadows between the houses. When Hao returned home, he swore the black dresser was heavier. The floor beneath it groaned faintly under its weight, and when he stepped closer, he thought he heard it. A faint drip, drip, drip from inside. That night, as he lay awake, the fog pressed against his windows again. The village had fallen silent, yet somewhere in that stillness, a soft scratching began, slow, deliberate, coming from the corner where the 13th dresser waited. The village did not sleep easily after the child's death. Doors were barred. Families huddled together in single rooms, laying mats side by side so no one would be left alone. Lamps burned through the night, casting thin halos into the fog that seeped through every crack. Hao sat at his table, staring at the 13th dresser. The black wood glistened faintly in the lamplight, like it had been polished, though he had not touched it since that first night. The air in the room felt warmer near it, almost humid, carrying the faint, metallic scent that clung stubbornly to his throat. He tried to drink it away. 3 cups of rice wine later, the scent was still there, heavier now. Outside, the fog moved strangely, as if it had a current. It swirled in long, slow spirals across the courtyard, then crept upward along the walls. Every so often, Hao thought he saw a shadow pass through it, too quick to name, but shaped like someone walking barefoot. By midnight, the scratching began again. Soft at first, a single drag of nails along wood, then another, slow, rhythmic. Hao pressed his palms to his ears, but the sound seemed to come from inside his head. Then, under the scratch, he heard it, the faint rip of fabric being torn, followed by a wet sound, like something dripping onto the floor. He told himself not to look. He looked anyway. The lid was closed, but the lock hung open. A thin line of dark liquid ran from the seam down the dresser's front leg and onto the floorboards, pooling in a shape almost like a footprint. A distant scream broke through the night, one sharp, piercing note that seemed to freeze the air. Hao bolted upright, the sound pulling him toward the door. By the time he reached the neighbor's house, 2 doors down, a crowd was already forming. Another body lay in the courtyard, covered hastily with a sheet. The sheet was soaked through at the chest, the dark stain glistening under the lantern light. "They were all sleeping in the same room," someone said in a trembling voice. "No one saw anything, just she wasn't breathing when they woke, and her clothes." Howe didn't need to hear the rest. He turned back toward his home, heart pounding. The fog seemed thicker now, curling low around his feet. As he stepped inside, the air felt heavier, denser, and the dresser. It was sitting a few inches closer to his sleeping mat than before.
By dawn, the fog had seeped into the walls. Moisture dripped from the beams, and the hearth fire hissed weakly as if smothered by unseen hands. Howe had not slept at all. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the dresser, black wood glistening, lock dangling open, its presence somehow larger than the night before. When he finally dared to approach it, the floorboards creaked under his weight and then groaned louder as he drew closer. The dresser seemed to sink slightly into the floor, as though its weight had doubled. Howe pressed his hands to its sides, meaning only to test it. He couldn't budge it an inch. The familiar family dresser in the other corner had always been heavy, but this felt rooted, as if its legs had grown down into the earth. The air around it was warm, almost feverish. A faint haze shimmered above the lid, carrying with it that same metallic tang, sharper now, not just blood, but sweat, skin, breath. From outside, a soft knock sounded at his door. Howe hesitated, then opened it to find the village elder, his face pale, lips pressed tight. "It's heavier, isn't it?" the old man asked without greeting. Howe's jaw tightened. You knew this would happen. The elder stepped inside, his eyes flicking to the dresser. "It grows heavier after each taking. The more it feeds, the more it stays." Howe's fists clenched. "And what happens when it's too heavy to move at all?" The elder didn't answer right away. His gaze lingered on the black wood, and for a moment his expression shifted. Not fear, but resignation. "Then it will no longer need to wait for night." A deep, muffled thud came from inside the dresser. Both men froze. It wasn't the soft shifting of garments this time. It was the unmistakable sound of something solid, dropping. The elder took a step back. "It's already taking more than it should." Howe felt the heat radiating stronger now, curling up his arms, sinking into his chest. His mother's scarf was in there, but so was something else, something that had weight, warmth, and the patience to wait until he was alone. That night, Howe tried to shove his sleeping mat farther from the dresser, but no matter how he angled it, no matter where he sat, he could still feel it, the steady, slow exhale of something breathing inside the wood. The fog that night was so dense it seemed to press against the walls, sealing the village from the rest of the world. No wind, no insect song, only a thick, unnatural stillness that made every small sound inside Howe's house echo unnervingly loud. He had moved his sleeping mat as far from the black dresser as possible, tucking it into the corner near the stove, but distance did nothing to dull the sense of its presence. Even with the lamp turned away, he could picture it clearly in his mind. The grain of its wood like ripples in water, the iron lock swaying slightly, though there was no breeze. The first sound came just after midnight. a faint tap, as if something inside had dropped onto the wood. Then silence. A few breaths later, a soft drag, fabric shifting against fabric, deliberate and slow. The sound stopped just long enough for Hao to wonder if he'd imagined it, then started again, a little louder, like someone rummaging through clothes in the dark. Hao sat up, straining to listen, and then he heard the breathing. It wasn't human. The rhythm was too steady, the inhale too deep, the exhale too slow, like air moving through a cavern. Each breath carried that warm metallic scent, stronger now, coating the back of his throat. He reached for the lamp, but froze when the breathing changed, quickened, as if aware of his movement. The dragging of fabric turned into tearing. Threads snapped one by one, followed by the wet shook of something heavy sliding across soaked cloth. Hao's skin prickled. A whisper slipped out from inside the dresser. Not words, just a dry, rasping hiss, like a mouth too parched to form them. Then came the scratching. This time it wasn't from the bottom, but from the inside of the lid, as though long nails were tracing the outline of the wood directly above whatever was inside. The scratches formed a slow circle, over and over, like marking where to push. Hao backed against the wall, clutching the lamp. He didn't dare open it, didn't dare even step closer. The scratching stopped. A long silence stretched out, broken only by the sound of a single drop hitting the floor. Then another. Tap. Tap. When Hao finally glanced toward the dresser, he saw a thin, wet line seeping from the seam where the lid met the body. It ran down the front, staining the wood a darker shade. And then, from deep inside, came a low, muffled laugh. By dawn, Hao's eyes burned from staying awake. The scratching and the laughter had stopped sometime before the first rooster crowed, but the silence afterward felt worse, as if the thing inside the dresser had simply grown patient again. He didn't open the door when the first knock came. It was only after the third, louder and more insistent, that he unlatched it. The village elder stood outside, his cloak beaded with droplets from the fog. His expression was tight, his gaze flicking briefly toward the black dresser in the corner before settling back on Hao. "We need to speak," he said. Hao didn't answer, just stepped aside. The elder entered slowly, as if wary of crossing some invisible line in the room. He sat by the low table, but kept his back to the wall, facing the dresser directly. "I heard it last night. It moved. It spoke." The elder's eyes narrowed. "It doesn't speak, not in the way you think. It remembers. It remembers scents, warmth, voices, and it repeats them until you come closer." Hao's stomach twisted. "What is it?" The elder drew a long breath, his gaze distant. "Long before I was born, before my grandfather was born, the village was plagued by something that took people in the night. No one ever saw it clearly, only the empty beds in the morning. Always the bodies gone, but their clothes left behind, torn, bloodied." Hao leaned forward. "And the dresser?" "One winter, the attacks stopped. The elders of that time claimed they had trapped it, not in chains, not in a cage, but in a vessel it could not leave. They built a chest from the wood of the old gallows tree, sealed it with iron from the mountain, and lined it with the garments of those it had taken. The thing settled. It fed on the scent and the warmth trapped in the cloth. As long as it was given more, only from the dead, it would not take the living." Hao's mind reeled. So all this time, the 13th dresser has been a prison, the elder finished. "But prisons need guards. That's why it's kept locked, why no one touches it. It is always hungry. The garments from the dead are only enough to dull its hunger, never to satisfy it." Hao's hands curled into fists. "Then why put my mother's scarf in there?" The elder's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Because the lock was weakening. We could feel it in the air. If it had gone another month without feeding, it would have started taking again. Your mother's passing gave us an offering before it could choose one for itself." Hao's throat tightened. The thought that his mother's last possession had been given to that thing as food made his blood run hot. "You knew this could happen," he said, voice low. "You let it happen." The elder did not flinch. "I prevented worse." A heavy creak came from the dresser, loud in the small room. Both men turned to look. The iron lock, which Hao was certain he had left hanging open, was now fastened shut. Neither one of them had touched it. That night, Hao didn't light the lamp. He sat in the dark, the only glow coming from the thin sliver of moon through the window. The air felt heavy, like it had weight, pressing down on his chest. He told himself he would not look at the dresser, that he would keep his eyes on the doorway, the only way out if something happened. But the longer he sat, the more he felt it, not just its presence, but its attention, as though the thing inside could see him even in the dark. Somewhere in the stillness came a faint drip, then another. He leaned forward, squinting into the shadows. A thin line of liquid glistened on the floorboards, catching the pale moonlight. It was dark, thicker than water, and it ran in a slow trail from the base of the dresser toward the far wall. Hao's heartbeat quickened. He followed it on hands and knees, the boards cold beneath his palms. The trail curved around the stove, across the doorway, and toward the back of the house, toward the small door that led to the courtyard. The door's latch was unfastened. Hao slid it open, and the fog rolled in, cold and damp. The trail continued outside, glistening faintly in the mist. He stepped into the courtyard, his bare feet sinking into the wet earth. The droplets here were fresher, warmer when his fingers touched them. Each one was spaced perfectly apart, as if they had fallen from something being carried, or from someone walking barefoot, their steps marked in blood. The trail led through the narrow alley between his house and the neighbors, then toward the path out of the village. The fog thickened as he went, swallowing sound. More than once he thought he heard movement ahead, a soft shuffle, the faint rasp of cloth, but when he quickened his pace, the sound stopped. Finally, the trail ended at the foot of an old pine, the roots knotted out of the earth like twisted fingers. And there, hanging from one of the low branches, was a single garment, a child's shirt, wet, heavy, still warm. Hao's stomach lurched. He knew the pattern, faint blue stitching along the hem. He had seen it earlier that week on the youngest son of the family 2 houses down. Somewhere deep in the fog, a low sound rose. Not quite a growl, not quite a laugh, but something in between. It drifted around him, coming from no direction and every direction at once. He turned back toward his house, but when the outline of his home finally appeared through the mist, his chest tightened. The dresser was no longer against the wall where he had left it. It was sitting in the center of the room, its lid slightly open, as if waiting for him to come closer. The elder arrived at Hao's house before dawn, flanked by 3 other men from the council. They carried bundles wrapped in white cloth, and the smell of incense clung to them so heavily it seemed to fight with the damp, metallic scent still lingering in the room. The first thing the elder saw was the dresser, sitting square in the center of the floor, as if it had claimed the space for itself. The iron lock dangled open again. No one had touched it. "We do it now," the elder said. His voice was firm, but Hao saw the way his hands trembled. They began by sprinkling a ring of salt around the dresser, each grain hissing faintly when it touched the wood. Next came strips of white cloth, soaked in a mixture of rice wine and ash, laid across the lid in a crisscross pattern. Symbols, jagged, looping, older than the written language Hao knew, were painted on the fabric in dark ink. The men chanted under their breath, a low, rolling rhythm that seemed to make the air denser. The elder stepped forward with a clay bowl filled with chicken blood, dipping his fingers in and smearing it along the edges of the dresser, sealing the seam where the lid met the base. Hao stood in the corner, watching every movement. The heat from the dresser was stronger than ever, as if it was aware of what they were doing. Halfway through the ritual, the wood shuddered. It was subtle at first, a faint vibration through the floorboards, then stronger, rattling the bowls and knocking the salt ring out of place in one spot. A low, drawn-out groan escaped from inside, followed by the muffled sound of fabric ripping. "Hold it!" the elder barked. 2 men pressed their palms hard against the lid. Something inside pushed back, slow but powerful, like a great weight shifting. The chants grew louder, the symbols on the white cloth seeming to darken, as if the ink was being absorbed. A sudden thud made everyone flinch. Something inside had slammed hard against the wood. Then, silence. The elder quickly clasped the lock shut and wrapped it in another strip of white cloth, tying it with a knot so tight it bit into the metal. "It is bound again," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Hao stared at the dresser. The heat had faded, but not gone. The metallic scent was still there, hiding beneath the incense. As the men left, the elder paused at the door. "This will hold it, for now, but it is feeding too quickly. If it breaks free again, the ritual will not work a second time." When Hao was alone, he sat in the quiet, his eyes fixed on the black wood. For the first time, the thought came to him clearly. Maybe the only way to end this was not to seal the dresser, but to destroy it. And somewhere deep inside the chest, hidden under layers of cloth, something exhaled slowly, as if it had been listening the entire time. That night, the fog was unnaturally still. It didn't drift or curl. It hung in the air like a wall, as if the village had been sealed inside a jar. The silence was so deep, Hao could hear the faint ticking of the cooling stove. The dresser sat where the elders had left it, bound in white cloth and symbols, the iron lock buried under knots. The salt ring around it had already begun to clump from the damp air, but otherwise everything seemed undisturbed. Hao tried to sleep. He lay on his mat, facing away from the dresser, telling himself that the ritual had worked, that whatever was inside was sealed again. Then came the sound. A slow, deliberate creak, wood bending under pressure. Not loud, but sharp in the silence. Hao's eyes opened. He didn't turn. His breath slowed, ears straining. Another creak, then a faint tearing sound, like cloth being pulled against nails. He rolled over. One of the white strips binding the dresser had loosened, hanging like a dead snake against the side. The knot around the lock was frayed, and from the seam between lid and base, something pale pushed through. At first, Heo thought it was cloth, then it twitched. A hand. The skin was the color of wet parchment, stretched thin over sharp knuckles. The fingers were too long, jointed oddly, nails thick and yellowed, curling like talons. It groped along the wood, feeling the air as though searching for something or someone. Heo's body refused to move. The hand dragged itself along the front of the dresser, leaving faint smears of something dark on the wood. When it reached the floor, it gripped the boards hard enough to make them creak. The lid shifted higher, as if whatever was inside was trying to pull itself out. A shadow moved within the gap. Not a clear shape, but something dense, heavy, with the slow confidence of a predator that had no need to rush. Heo forced his limbs to obey. He grabbed the fire poker from beside the stove and stepped toward the dresser. The hand froze mid-motion, the long nails curling slightly, as if sensing him. Then slowly, it turned, not the wrist, but the entire arm rotating in an unnatural angle until the fingers pointed straight at him. Heo's grip on the poker tightened. His breath felt loud in his ears. The dresser gave a low, drawn-out groan, and the hand withdrew, sliding back into the dark gap with the sound of wet fabric. The lid lowered. The knot on the lock was intact again. Heo stared, heart hammering, unsure if it truly happened or if the thing inside simply wanted him to think it had. From somewhere deep inside the dresser came a single sound, a slow, muffled knock, like a request to be let out.
Hao didn't sleep after the hand withdrew. He sat upright until the first gray light bled through the fog, listening for any sound from the dresser. None came. The silence was worse than the scratching. It felt intentional, like the thing inside was waiting for him to relax before moving again. By midday, he could no longer resist the pull. He untied the cloth binding the lock, every knot stiff with dried chicken blood from the sealing ritual. The smell of iron and rot drifted out, heavy enough to coat his tongue. He lifted the lid. The garments inside were folded with unnatural precision, each crease sharp, each stack aligned perfectly, as though someone had arranged them by hand only moments before. But the longer he stared, the more he realized they were moving. Not much, just a faint trembling, like fabric shivering in a draft. But the windows were closed. He reached down and touched the nearest garment, a pale cotton shirt. The fabric was warm, almost fever hot, and beneath the weave he felt something pulsing. Then he heard it, a breath. Not from the dresser as a whole, but from the shirt itself. A faint inhale followed by a slow exhale that seemed to pass through the threads. Hao jerked his hand back, his skin crawling. He leaned closer, his ear hovering over the pile. More sounds emerged, overlapping whispers, too soft to form words, but full of pain. Some voices sobbed, others muttered frantically, looping the same few syllables over and over. With a trembling hand, Hao lifted another garment, a faded dress, its hem stiff with dried stains. The moment it shifted, a voice tore through the whispers, clear and desperate. "Help me!" Hao dropped the dress. It landed with a dull, wet sound, and the whispering surged. Dozens of voices overlapping, some pleading, others screaming. He understood then. These weren't just clothes. Each piece held what was left of someone, their breath, their warmth, the last fragment of their soul. The dresser didn't just feed on garments. It imprisoned the dead inside them, folding them away in the dark where they could never rest. One voice rose above the rest, his mother's,
How? Please. The sound rooted him in place. He wanted to answer, to reach in and pull her free, but every instinct screamed that touching her garment would mean never letting go. The whispers swelled, turning into a single deafening rush of breath, and then, all at once, they stopped. The garments lay still. The lid slammed shut on its own, the lock snapping into place with a metallic bite. Hal stumbled back, his chest heaving. The room was silent again, but the air smelled sharply of iron. And in that silence, a single thought formed, cold and absolute. If he wanted to free his mother, he would have to open the dresser completely. That evening, Hal went to find the elder. He didn't knock, just slid the old wooden door open and stepped inside. The small house smelled of dried herbs and smoke, but underneath lingered a familiar metallic tang. The elder was sitting cross-legged near the altar, grinding something in a mortar. He didn't look up when Hal entered. "You've opened it," the elder said flatly. Hal's fists clenched. "They're not just clothes. There are voices, souls. My mother's in there." The grinding stopped. The elder's hand hovered over the pestle for a moment before he set it down. He met Hal's eyes with a look that was not surprise, but weariness. "You weren't supposed to know," he said quietly. "That's why we tell the children it's only for keeping the scent of the dead. But the truth is darker." He gestured for Hal to sit, but Hal remained standing. "A long time ago, before there was a village here, the mountain belonged to something else. It walked in the fog, wearing the clothes of those it took, their faces hidden, but their voices perfect. It could call you by the name only your mother used, and you would follow it into the mist without hesitation. The people tried to fight it. Spears, fire, charms, nothing worked, until a wandering priest came and told them, 'It does not eat flesh for hunger. It feeds to keep what it has taken.' The priest said there was a way to bind it, not to destroy it, for that was impossible, but to give it a prison it would accept, something to hold its hunger. They built the first dresser from the gallows tree, iron nails forged in blood, and they lured it with a trail of garments from those it had claimed. When it entered, it did not leave. The garments held the warmth, the smell, the essence of its victims, and it fed on that instead of hunting. But it demanded more, not scraps, not cloth from strangers. It wanted offerings from the village itself." Hal's voice was low and sharp. "And you agreed?" The elder didn't flinch. "Our ancestors swore a pact. Every death in the village would give the 13th dresser a piece of the departed. In return, no one would be taken alive. The blood of the first council sealed that promise." Hal stepped closer, his shadow falling across the elder's face. "And when there aren't enough dead?" The elder's gaze dropped. "Then it chooses for itself." The room seemed colder now, though the fire still burned. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. Hal's voice was almost a whisper. "So my mother's death, it was convenient." The elder closed his eyes. "It was necessary." A sharp creak echoed from the doorway. Both men turned. Hal's breath caught. The fog had seeped inside, curling along the floor, and sitting just beyond the threshold, as if it had walked there on its own, was the black dresser. Its lock hung open. That night, Hal didn't remember falling asleep. One moment he was staring at the ceiling, the faint glow of the dying lamp painting trembling shadows across the beams. The next,
He was standing in the middle of his home, but it wasn't his home. The walls were gone, replaced by endless rows of dressers stretching into the dark. Each was carved from the same black wood, each bearing the same iron lock. The air was thick and warm, heavy with the mingled scents of old cloth, sweat, and something sharper, blood that had never cooled. A sound rippled through the rows, not a single noise, but 100 small ones, fabric shifting, whispers rising and falling, the occasional sob. As Hao walked forward, the locks on the dressers clicked open, one by one, their lids creaking upward as if they had been waiting for him. From each, garments rose as though lifted by invisible hands. Shirts, dresses, scarves, all swaying gently in the air. Their sleeves and hems reached toward him, brushing his arms, clinging to his clothes. The warmth in them was human, disturbingly so. A familiar voice cut through the murmurs. How? He turned. At the far end of the row stood his mother, her hair loose around her shoulders, wearing the scarf they had taken from her. Her eyes were hollow, but her smile was soft, too soft. You left me in the dark, she said. Her voice was calm, almost kind. You can bring me back. Just open it all the way. He took a step toward her, but the ground shifted beneath him. The floorboards buckled, and from the gaps, dozens of pale hands reached up, their fingers long and jointed wrong. They gripped his ankles, pulling him down into the cracks. The dressers around him shuddered violently. Their lids snapped open, and from inside, not cloth, but faces stared back, drained of color, mouths sewn shut with thread the same shade as dried blood. Their eyes moved, tracking him, unblinking. Hao struggled, kicking against the grip of the hands. The rows of dressers seemed to close in, narrowing the path. His mother was still there, her smile widening unnaturally as she reached out a hand. Don't fight it. You're already inside. Something yanked hard, and he fell forward, straight into the open maw of the 13th dresser. The inside was not wood at all, but flesh, warm and slick, pulling him deeper. The whispers became screams, rising to a deafening pitch. Hao jerked awake, gasping. The room was dark. His mat was damp with sweat. For a moment he told himself it had only been a dream. Then he saw it. The 13th dresser was pressed up against the edge of his mat, closer than it had ever been before. Its lid was open just a crack, enough for a single pale fingertip to rest on the floor between them. Hao didn't move. The pale fingertip on the floor was still, but he could see it twitch faintly with each breath. Not his, but something else's. His throat was dry, his body locked between the urge to run and the pull to look inside. Then he heard it. Hao. His mother's voice, as clear as if she were kneeling right beside him. It wasn't the hollow echo from his dream. It was warm, trembling, alive. Please, I'm cold. Let me out. Hao's chest tightened. The voice came from inside the dresser, low and muffled, but it carried the exact cadence she'd used when calling him in from playing as a child. I can't, he whispered. It's not you. It's never you. A pause, then softer. They put me here. They took me from you. I've been in the dark, listening to them scream. You can end it. The fingertip withdrew, sliding back into the shadow of the lid. The crack widened slowly, and the faint scent of her scarf drifted out. Jasmine soap, smoke from the cooking fire, and under it the metallic tang of something freshly bled. You only have to open it all the way. Pull me out. Bring me home. Hao's hand hovered over the lock. It was warm, almost hot,
and seemed to throb beneath his fingers in time with his racing pulse. He could feel something on the other side, not just waiting, but leaning toward him. Then another voice joined hers. It was lower, wet, like breath bubbling through blood. "Open it, boy. Feed me, or I'll feed myself." A sudden heavy thud rattled the dresser, making the wood groan. From inside came the tearing of fabric and the faint wet slap of something heavy hitting cloth. The village outside was silent, too silent. The fog pressed hard against the windows, the glass beading with moisture. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once, then cut off mid-howl. Howe's fingers gripped the lock. One choice meant seeing her again, maybe even freeing her. The other meant sealing her forever, but keeping the thing inside from taking more. "How?" the voice repeated, soft and pleading. "Don't leave me here." The air around him seemed to lean in, waiting. By morning, Hal had made his choice. He went to the elder's house without knocking. "We're burning it," he said, before the old man could speak. The elder's face was unreadable. "Fire won't take it. We've tried." "Then we'll try harder," Hal snapped. "If we leave it, it will take more." That afternoon, word spread quietly. 4 men, all of them with losses in the recent nights, gathered in Hal's courtyard. They brought axes, ropes, and clay jars of oil. No one else came to watch. Most villagers kept their doors shut, pretending not to hear. The dresser sat in the center of the room as if it knew what they planned. The lock was fastened, the wood glistening faintly in the pale light, almost as if it had been oiled already. "We'll take it outside first," one of the men muttered. They looped ropes around its frame. Even with 4 of them, the dresser resisted, heavy as stone. The floorboards groaned, and something inside shifted with a slow, wet sound, like a sack of soaked grain being dragged. When they finally dragged it into the courtyard, the fog swirled around it, curling higher like smoke before the fire had even been lit. Hal splashed the oil across the lid, the sides, the legs, the ground beneath it, until the air was sharp with its fumes. The elder arrived then, leaning heavily on his cane. "Once you begin," he said, "don't stop until it's gone, no matter what you hear." Hal struck the first spark. The flames caught fast, racing along the oil-slicked wood. For a moment, it seemed almost too easy, the heat flaring, the black surface blistering. But then the smell changed. Not the dry, acrid scent of burning wood, but the thick, sickening odor of seared meat. The dresser shuddered violently. From inside came a chorus of screams, high, low, overlapping, dozens of voices all at once. Some begged, some wailed in agony, others shouted Hal's name in perfect imitation of people he had known. One voice cut through the rest, his mother's. "Hal, stop! You're burning me!" He froze, the torch shaking in his hand. The voices swelled, becoming deafening, until the flames themselves seemed to flicker as if struggling against the sound. Then something slammed against the inside of the lid so hard the lock snapped and flew into the dirt. The lid burst open and a wave of heat and steam rolled out, carrying with it a blast of red mist. Inside, the garments writhed like living things, sleeves and hems twisting together into shapes that almost formed limbs. They reached for the edges, pulling themselves upward. "Keep burning," the elder shouted, his voice breaking. Hal forced himself forward, pushing the torch deep inside. The flames roared, but so did whatever was inside, its scream turning into a low, furious growl. And then the wood beneath Hal's hands began to feel wet. The flames did not consume it. They hissed, spat, and curled upward, but the black wood beneath seemed to drink them in. The more Hal pushed the torch inside, the more the dresser shuddered. not in pain, but in rage. From the opening, the garments poured out in a churning wave, dragging themselves across the courtyard like snakes made of cloth. Sleeves whipped through the air, wrapping around the legs of the men who had come to help. The moment the fabric touched skin, they screamed, not from pain, but from the sensation of being pulled through their own bodies. Hao saw it happen to the first man. His clothes split open without tearing, seams parting as if by invisible hands. The garments wrapped tighter, stripping them away in one smooth, horrifying motion. The man's scream cut off when his body went limp, falling naked to the ground. His chest did not rise again. The freed garments slithered back toward the dresser, vanishing into its mouth like loyal pets returning to their master. The elder shouted for them to retreat, but the fog in the courtyard thickened instantly, walling them in. Hao couldn't see more than an arm's length ahead. The air was hot, humid, stinking of iron and smoke. Somewhere in that blinding whiteness, more voices began calling, the same perfect imitations from before. "Hao, help me! Brother, this way! Son, over here!" He knew they weren't real, but each one twisted something in his chest. A shape lunged out of the fog, another man, his face pale and slack, his eyes wide and empty. His clothes hung on him strangely, the sleeves and seams bulging as though something underneath was moving. Before Hao could react, the man's shirt collar peeled back, revealing not skin, but a second mouth, stitched from red fabric, opening wide. Hao stumbled back, falling hard. His torch rolled away, sputtering in the wet dirt. By the time he scrambled up, the courtyard was chaos. The remaining two men were down, their bodies already being dragged toward the open dresser. The elder was on his knees, gripping the salt bag he'd brought earlier, trying desperately to scatter a line between the thing and the rest of the village, but the fog swallowed the grains before they even touched the ground. Then the dresser moved. Not dragged, not pushed, it walked, its short, thick legs thudding against the earth like stumps. Each step was deliberate, carrying it toward the houses. The garments inside writhed faster, reaching outward. Hao didn't remember running, but suddenly he was in the main street of the village. Every house was wreathed in fog. Doors banged open. Shapes emerged, some human, some not, all naked, all silent. The sound of tearing cloth came from everywhere at once. By dawn, the fog began to thin, and there were no voices left in the village. Only bodies, pale and still, scattered in doorways and on the dirt paths. Not a single piece of clothing remained on any of them. Hao stood alone in the silence, the 13th dresser sitting at the center of the square, its lid closed, its lock fastened. It was clean again, as if it had never burned. The silence after the slaughter was heavier than the fog had ever been. Hao stood in the empty village square, staring at the 13th dresser. Its black wood gleamed faintly in the morning light, the iron lock fastened tight, the surface smooth and dry, as though the night's carnage had been nothing more than a dream. The elder's body lay slumped beside it, one arm outstretched toward the lock, fingers curled as if he died reaching for it. The salt bag was still tied to his belt, unopened. Hao's legs felt like stone as he stepped closer. The air around the dresser was warm again, carrying that faint metallic scent that he now knew would never leave him. For hours he stood there, not knowing what to do. The sun climbed, then dipped toward the horizon, but the fog never fully lifted. No one came, no voices called. The village was gone. By dusk, he realized the truth. If he left the dresser here, someone would eventually find it. A traveler, a scavenger, Another settlement searching for abandoned land, and then it would begin again. So he stayed. Days passed. He buried no one. There was nothing left to bury. Instead, he kept the houses shut, the paths clear of footprints, so it would seem the place was untouched, uninhabited. And every night, he heard the scratching from the dresser, sometimes soft, sometimes furious. Sometimes it was his mother's voice, sometimes others. He never answered. Weeks later, a group of traders wandered into the village. Howe met them at the edge, standing in the mist. "This place is cursed," he told them. "Leave now." They didn't argue, but one man glanced past Howe's shoulder toward the faint outline of the dresser in the square. His eyes lingered too long. That night, Howe dragged the dresser into his own home, locking the door behind him. If it was going to feed again, it would be through him, not the rest of the world. Years later, far from the mountain, in a crowded riverside town, a crate arrived at a merchant's shop. The wood was black, the iron lock rusted, the surface carved with symbols no one could read. The merchant wiped the dust from the lid and frowned at how warm it felt under his hand. He called to his apprentice. "Strange thing. Looks like some kind of old chest." From inside came the faint sound of fabric shifting, followed by a single, patient knock.